We're going to get started. We're in the middle of Perek Aleph of Sefer Ezra. Good morning, everyone. And just to remind everyone where we're at in this story, was the first year of Cyrus's reign. Cyrus feels that he was called upon by God. We actually dealt with where that may have happened in a nevuah that took place more than 100 years before his birth. He was apparently aware of that, or he just feels that he is the person who's been chosen by God. We have found other rulers, autocrats, kings, and even sometimes presidents who feel that they are chosen by God to accomplish something very, very special. And so as a result, he challenges the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel and to build the Beit HaMikdash. We also dealt with last week the reality that we know that this wasn't something unique, actually, that Cyrus did for the Jewish people, but actually Cyrus, this was part of his overall policy of undoing what the Babylonians had done. The Babylonians, if you recall, had practiced population exchange to maintain their power and their grip over their conquered nations, whereas we see within documents from that time that actually this was something, if you remember the Cyrus cylinder, that this was something that Cyrus did by giving people rights and giving them religious freedoms, that how he felt he was going to be able to rule over a vast empire. We got to the point where he challenges all of them, and we begin to see one step after another of how things are moving along. And so just to take you back to Pasuk Hey of Perek Aleph, Pasuk Hey says, V'yakumu roshei avot Yehuda u'Binyamin, that the heads of the families of Yehuda and Binyamin. Now, if you think about it for a minute, this call that Cyrus was making was to the exile that had happened, the Babylonian exile of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Judea, Yehuda and Binyamin. And so the call goes out to Yehuda and Binyamin. They are the most recent of the exiles. They are the ones who 52 years ago, the last group of them had come already to Babylonia. And the heads of those families rise up, and the Kohanim, V'Kohanim, V'Levim, and also the Kohanim and the Levim. We'll see in a moment that there weren't too many Levim who stepped up, and we'll see even an interesting theory that Yoel bin Nun suggests for it. L'chol he'ir Elokim et rucho la'alot livnot et Beit Hashem asher b'Yerushalayim. Everyone who God had raised their spirits to build the Beit HaMikdash within Yerushalayim. Now, V'chol svivotehem chizku b'yadehem, and as we also did before, as Cyrus had challenged them, all the people who did not go, they were challenged to be able to provide for them support. So they paid for the effort, that they went ahead and they provided for them silver and gold and property and animals and food. Levad al kol nadev. Okay, in addition to everything else that was donated. Pasuk Zayin. V'hamelech koresh hotzi et klei Beit Hashem. Now Cyrus takes out the conquered kelim, the conquered utensils from the Beit HaMikdash. It's an interesting thing that I have been troubled by on this, and we'll see in a minute why. But he takes them all out to hand them back to the Jewish people. Asher hotzi Nebuchadnezzar miYerushalayim. Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Yerushalayim, v'yitneim b'veit Elokav, and Nebuchadnezzar had put them in his temple. So this was, he takes them, and what does he do? V'yotzieim Koresh melech Paras. Koresh goes ahead and he takes them out. The Malbim points out that when he takes them out, this act of taking them out of the house of pagan worship is what we refer to halachically as bittul. One of the interesting things is if something has been used for pagan worship, it remains a pagan item for as long as it exists, unless if the pagans say it's no longer pagan. Okay, and so as a result, the Malbim say, okay, by giving them away, they at that point say we have nothing to do with these anymore. It's an element of bittul, which is a halachic piece, because otherwise, how could we possibly use the kelim that they had defiled? Yep.
If they had put it in their treasure house
just for storage, right?
just for storage, is that considered use for?
Not at all,
items?
not at all. But if you notice in the previous pasuk, it says "V'yitneim b'veit Elohav," that Nebuchadnezzar had put them in the temples. So the way the Malbim reads this is that they weren't put for storage in the temples, but now they were being used for pagan worship within the temples. V'yotziem Koresh melech Paras al yad Mitradat hagizbar. And he goes ahead, and Mitradat, who is his treasurer, brings them out. Vayisparem l'shesh batzar hanasi liuda. And then they count what's there and hand it off to Shesh Batzar, who was the prince, the head of the Judean people. Now, who Shesh Batzar is a matter of controversy. Rashi has us go back and say, oh, Daniel. That this is Daniel. Daniel has been part of this entire process. You remember he ruled over a vast period of time. He says this is Daniel. The Ibn Ezra and the Ralbag say, no, this is not Daniel, but based on a pasuk and a little bit, we say, no, this is Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is going to be the leader of the Jews. We're going to be mentioning him in just a few psukim. And so he handed it off to Shesh Batzar, Zerubbabel. That Mikra says it can't possibly be Zerubbabel. And the reason why it can't possibly be Zerubbabel is if we look later on in Perek Hey, we'll see that between psukim Yud Dalet and Yud Zayin, we say both Shesh Batzar and Zerubbabel. So we mention both characters, and we mention them both. Obviously, they're not the same. So as a result of that, he suggests that Shesh Batzar may be a different person who was Shenatzar. Shenatzar, if we look in Divrei Hayamim Aleph, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Yudchet, Shenatzar was the son of Yehoiachin Melech Yehuda. If you remember, Asher Hegla Yechonia, when Mordechai was taken out, or his ancestors were taken out into the exile by Yechonia. Yechonia was the person who had the first exile in the earliest time of Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar rose in the first year of his reign, 18 years before the Churban Abayit. This is his son. Shesh Batzar is the Persian form of the name Shenatzar. All of those are possible. We don't know. We really don't know. We know that Shesh Batzar was called the Nasi Yehuda, but he really doesn't play a role afterwards. The role is then handed off to Zerubbabel, so we're not sure. But everything is given to them. Now, my problem, which I haven't found an answer, and it may not be a problem, which is why I think there may not be an answer. Okay, it may be a problem that I'm imagining. If you remember, if Koresh is giving all of the utensils to the people who are going back to Eretz Yisrael, then how does Achashverosh, who's later, v'kelim mikelim shonim, pull out the utensils of the Beit HaMikdash? Now, the easy answer may be that he gave most of them and not all of them, and maybe they kept some. But what I haven't found yet is one of the Parshanim, one of the commentaries, who discusses how Cyrus could give all of these and there could still be some left. Again, it may not be a problem at all. It's just something I spent a lot of time trying to find an answer to, and no one else addresses, which is why I think that it's a problem that I've made up as opposed to a real one. Jimmy, it's some.
Isn't it a rough focus of what Achashverosh was?
Well, no matter when Achashverosh was, he was after Cyrus. There's no opinion that says he was before Cyrus, because Cyrus was the beginning of the Persian Empire, and Achashverosh was a Persian. Okay, yeah.
I was going to say, did they take the kalim right now to Yerushalayim?
Yep, they're gonna take it with them. So I don't. So the easy answer is there must have been something left over, but again, one of those cases where I think I found a problem and probably isn't a problem. So if anyone has if anyone comes across anything, whether you're online or you're in person, happy to hear the suggestions.
Historically, there are so many times that the kelim from the Mikdash were stolen, the doors from the Mikdash were stolen. There are so many things that happened that it could have been in one of those waves.
Well, the problem is, again, it seems to be that Cyrus is handing everything off. But again, he doesn't say that he is giving kol Klei HaMikdash. And he doesn't say he's giving all of the utensils. And it's true, there's a lot of stuff that, listen, there were times where things were sold off. And we know about that from Sefer Melachim. So again, as I say, it may be a problem that I'm inventing as opposed to a problem that really exists. Ve'ele misparam. And this is actually the count of what was given. Agar telei zahav shloshim. Basins, large bowls, 30. Agar telei chesef aleph. 1,000 of those silver bowls or basins. Machalafim tisha ve'esrim. 29 knives. Now it's interesting, just so you should know, we're going to have Agar Telei and we're also going to have Kiporei. Both of them I'm going to translate as bowls. The reality is there are so many different opinions that there's one thing we know that we don't know exactly what kind of bowl they are. And Chazal offer all different possibilities. There are theories on them. There's some, it seems to be some kind of bowl that was used either for collection of the blood in the Beit HaMikdash or possibly for a washing purpose. There were all of these things. The one thing we know is machalafim, just like nowadays, a shoichet has a chalif. That's the name of the knife that a shoichet uses. Okay, machalafim, the shechting knives. Kiporei zahav shloshim. Again, another kind of bowl, says Rashi. This one, the Mitzudot suggests it's called kiporei, is that this was the bowl that the Kohen would dip his finger in for the blood, but beforehand he would like scrape off his finger on the edge. And that's why it was called kiporei. Kiporei chesef mishnim. And then the bowls, and they may be double kind of bowls, that might be the word mishnim, or they may be secondary kind of bowls, 410, kelim achirim aleph, and another 1,000 kind of bowls or other utensils. Kol kelim lezahav v'lachesed, Kesev 5,400. There are 5,400 different kinds of utensils that were now handed off to Shesh Batzar. Hakol He'ala Shesh Batzar im He'alot HaGolami Bavel Yerushalayim. All of them were passed off.
That's massive.
Massive number, right? Which is why, again, I have that imaginary question of mine. It sure sounds like if you're passing off 5,400 utensils, why are you keeping 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 on your own?
Maybe it's not 5,400.
Who knows? Yeah, whatever. We don't know. It's a massive number of utensils. Yeah, Joel.
What about, could you think of the Archetypus later, but what about the menorah, the shulchan, all that?
All of those things were taken off. By the way, even with the Archetypus in the second Beit HaMikdash, the assumption is on most of these things, they were melted down. Okay, they were melted down for the gold. We're still going to keep on looking because otherwise, who knows what's going to be? Yeah.
We know where they are.
Yeah.
They're in the basement of the Vatican.
Right. Of course they are. Right. Anyway, so having said all of that, that's the end of this first parak. Now, what's going to happen in the second parak? Okay, the second parak, we're going to have a census. The second parak is 70 psukim long. And it is not an easy parak to go through because it's primarily names and places and numbers. And there are two versions of the second parak. There is here, and there is also a parallel version of this in the seventh parak of Nehemiah with some minor variations. If you look, there was a 2-page sheet that I printed up 2-sided. For those of you who are online, I will share that with you. Hopefully I can find it real quickly. It's got 2 sides to it. It's got blue on it as well. Give me a moment. Okay, this was now if you remember, there's this wonderful website of 929, the number of prakim which appear in the Tanakh. And it's meant for daily study of Tanakh. You finish Tanakh in the course of two plus years. Okay. Yoel Ben Nun was one of the great teachers of Tanakh of this generation. Yoel Ben Nun normally has these brief little articles within 929. And so on this one, he had an article, and what he was doing, he is comparing the numbers between what we find in Perek Bet to what we're going to find in Perek Zion of Nehemiah. And he's going to deal with the question of the difference in numbers. But if you look at this chart, what you'll see on the first page is really two things. One is the numbers, which are just in black, are the numbers that we find here, but in brackets, every so often, there's a different number. That bracket, for example, the first number is 2,172, 372, 775, but in Nehemiah Zion, in the 7th chapter of Nehemiah, the same group of people are 652 are the count. So we see differences in the counting. That's the main point. The difference between these main points is just to show how different those two counts are. There are 29,818 people who are referred to, not all named, who are referred to in our chapter, and when we look in the Nehemiah, it's 31,089. So there's a difference between the two, but there's also a difference between what we're going to find at the end of this parak, where you have a list where it says there were a total of 42,360. If you want to see where that number appears, I put it in red at the bottom of the page, 42,360, and it's precisely that same number that in Nehemiah. So what we have is we have a difference of 12,000 people. If I add up all my categories, I'm about 12,000 people less than the total. And so who are those missing people? That's part of what he's going to deal with. We'll get there. But the reason I'm showing you this now is not to overwhelm you, but to share with you the fact that if you look, it also gives us a very good way of understanding what happens in this chapter. What happens in the chapter is first, we go ahead and we start listing, that's where the number one is, the families from Yehudah. Then we start listing the families and numbers, that's number two, from Binyamin. Then number three, we have the families who identify with Binyamin, but unfortunately, they didn't have documents to prove that they were from Binyamin. It used to be very, very important, it's still very important to have a Sefer Yuchsin, to have documentation to say that what Shevet you were from, because remember, what Shevet you were from gave you land rights. If you weren't able to document it, you had a problem. Coming back to Eretz Yisrael, these people did not have, we accepted that they were probably Jews, but to give them land rights, we can't say you get a portion of the tribe of Binyamin unless we can prove you're from Binyamin. Number four, if you remember, is the number of people who are Kohanim. Okay, if you notice, there are 4,289 Kohanim who are coming back, okay, which is about 10% of the total number who come back. Then if you look at the Levium, there's only 341 Levium, or according to Nehemiah, 360 Levium, a small group of Levium. Then we have the people who are coming who are not of Jewish descent. Number five, the people who are called the Natinim. The Natinim, remember, according to Chazal, these were the people from Givon who approached Yehoshua with false identities and saying they'd come from a faraway place. They'd really come from very close. They disguised themselves. Yehoshua, by mistake, entered into a treaty with them. Don't worry, we'll take care of you, not realizing that this was a group of people they should have gone to war against. And they were placed as the people who were going to be water carriers and wood bearers within the Beit HaMikdash, to serve within the Beit HaMikdash. And also they're the people who were the servants of Shlomo. So we know this is a group of non-Jews. Then there's a group of people who claim to be Jews. They don't even say what Shevet they're from, but we don't know for sure that they are Jews. These are people who and the way Yoel Ben Nun mentions it, the law of return, the ancient law of return worked for them as well, meaning that they came back that they were considered part of the Aliyah that came back with Zerubbabel. And then we have one more family of Kohanim who couldn't prove they were Kohanim. And so that's also one more group of people. All told, we have these numbers, and we're going to see them inside with a lot of names. Yes?
So this was a great opportunity for the Givonites who are water carriers and the Avdei Shlomo who felt abused to stay behind. I'm being sarcastic.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they going back?
Well, you're making an assumption that they felt abused.
Right.
Apparently,
That's what people would say. How did Shlomo?
right. Apparently, they were people who had a role, who found this role to be meaningful. You know, there's Lahavdil, and I don't know why I'm making this association. There was a book, and then it was made into a movie about the fellow who was the butler in the White House. It was called The Butler, right? For several presidents. This person found his role in life to be very fulfilling and meaningful. Now you could say per person, he was a servant to the presidents, he was demeaned, and with all of the other things that nowadays they probably would try to say, but he found a meaningful life. He was treated well, and he had a role. It could be the very same thing with these people, the Natinim. We have no indication that they were mistreated. Remember, our biases regarding slavery based on the American slavery experience is very different than the Jewish slavery experience, whether it's for Jewish slaves where they really weren't slaves, to the issue of the Canaanite or the non-Jewish slaves who also had tremendous rights as well.
So what you're saying, excuse me, is that the fact that they are returning in the return to Eretz Israel actually bespeaks the fact that they were always on good terms and treated well.
I can't say always. Remember, you never say
Well,
say
that they're
never,
coming
right?
back,
But
right?
apparently they're
They
coming.
left.
Well, but there are some who are coming back. You know,
There are
it's,
some that were coming back, but maybe they were.
we don't know. So we don't really know. We don't know enough.
You don't know who's-
Listen, we don't know enough. We don't, but it would be a pretty safe assumption to say that they weren't mistreated.
Mhm.
These who are coming back
And they found their identification with
could be
Israel.
entirely. Yeah, Leah.
This list is before Ezra cleaned up the Euphrates.
This is all before Ezra, right?
Also about the slave, I think also it's the court that in Hebrew, the same word Eved can be positive, like Eved, Moshe was Eved Hashem, he wasn't Hashem's slave. There
Yeah.
really needs to be
To serve.
distinction.
To serve and not a servant and not slave. 100%. Now, what's interesting about this, and with this we'll get into Perek Bet, the Gemara in Yuma and Daf Tet Amud Bet criticizes the Jews in their return at this time of Shivat Zion. It says, "Imasitem atzmachem kechoma, valitem kulchem b'mei Ezra, nimshaltem kekesef shein rekev sholet bo." You would have been, if you had all gone together in strength together and all gone back, you would have been compared to silver, which never rots, which never rusts. Achshav shalitem kideltot nimshaltem le'erez shaharekev sholet bo. Now that you've only gone back with your small numbers, you're considered just like doorways, and wood can rot. And so it is very, very critical to Jewish people. The reality is that we have an assumption throughout Chazal that this was a small percentage of the Jews who came back with Ezra and Nehemiah, and the vast majority of the Jews stayed off. We don't have accurate numbers. And so, for example, if you were to go to the very last chapter of Sefer Yirmiyahu, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen just as it to show the people who are there. It'll take me one moment.
So meanwhile, I'll just say that this
Yes,
supports the epidemiologic statement, power is in numbers.
Yes,
What?
power is in numbers.
Oh.
Now, if you look at the end of it's Perek Nun Bet, it's 52 of Sefer Yirmiyahu, and if you go to the end of that chapter, it should be Pasuk Chof Hey, not Chof Hey. Yeah, Pasuk Chof Hey starts giving us the numbers of people who went from Bavel, and I'm sorry, went from Eretz Yisrael, were taken from Eretz Yisrael out into Bavel. And let me just see how I can get it. I apologize. One more second. Let's see if I can show it. Well, I'm just going to read it as follows. This is the earliest of the exiles. They took one person who was responsible for the in command of the soldiers. They took another 7 people. First time they just took out a small number, 60 some people. Then if you look in Pasuk Chaf Chet, okay, Zeh ha'am asher hegla Nebuchadnezzar b'shnat sheva, Yehudim 3,023. Nebuchadnezzar took first exile. His first time of exile were 3,023 people. Then Bishnat Shmona Esrei, in the 18th year, okay, he took out 832 people. And then Bishnat Shalosh Esrim, in the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, Hegla Nebuzdaran, Rav Tabachim Yehudim Nefesh 745 Kol Nefesh 4,600. He took out another 745 from Yehuda, the total amount of 4,600 people. We don't have the numbers. This is the numbers of the Galut, okay? And ultimately, we don't have the real numbers of how many people were taken. We have an understanding from Chazal that a very small number. The only kind, this is the only kind of census of the people who were exiled, and it's a pittance, especially since we know that more than 40,000 came back. We just don't know how many went out. We don't have a clear understanding of that. We know that Chazal said only a few returned. Yeah, Mayor.
Do you know what percentage of the total number?
No, we,
What percentage does these
Well,
numbers all represent?
Chazal say, and the understanding throughout is it was a small percentage, even historians say it was a small percentage of the Jews. We don't know exactly how many, what percentage it was. Was it 5%? Was it 10%? Was it 20%? By the way, even if it was 80%, which I haven't seen anyone that suggests such a thing, even if it was 80%, it's still a great criticism of the Jews that 50 years after the exile, you have a chance to go back to Eretz Yisrael, then not all of them choose to return. Okay, it's one thing where we are criticized for living in the diaspora, but we've gotten used to this after 2,000 years. And then we didn't even have an opportunity to really return to Eretz Yisrael until really, for most people, until the 60s, until 60 years ago, even though the United Israel was founded, if you remember, in 48 when it was founded, and many people who left because of the hardships, the poverty, the lack of food, of resources in the 40s and 50s. It was horrific in Israel to live there. People had to be real chalutzim. Okay, so we can justify the diaspora. But there it's complicated. Now again, it's complicated for a person who lives in the diaspora to criticize the people who chose to stay in the diaspora in those days, but there is a difference between the two, and I'm sure they would say to me, there is no difference. Now, what I wanted to do with this whole introduction is just say, listen, what we're going to be dealing with now are groups of names, and the names are going to be in categories. Basically, the way Yol Ben Nun laid it out, there's about 7 categories of these people. And let's go back and get back into the Perek beds, okay? Ve'ela b'nei Amdina, and these are the people of the Medina. Rashi says Medina means literally the province of Eretz Yisrael that was within the Persian Empire. However, the Ibn Ezra says no. It's the Medina of Bavel. These are the people from the country of Bavel who go back. Interestingly, Nehemiah refers to in Perek Aleph, the beginning of Nehemiah, he refers to Yehud Medinta, the Medina of Yehudim. Okay. Mishvi Hagolah, Haolim Mishvi Hagolah, Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. These are the people who were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, Bavel to Bavel. Vayashuvu Yerushalayim Yehuda Ish Le'iro, and they all went back to their own places. Now, of course, the only ones who could go back to their own places are the people who knew where their places were. So it isn't an absolute comment because we see there were some people who weren't sure of who they were. Asher Bawim Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Sraya, Re'eliah, Mordechai Bilshan, Mispar, Begavai, Rachum Ba'ana. Okay, who went back with these people. Now, who are these people? So Zerubbabel, we know, based on Sefer Chagai, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, and also Perek Bet, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, he was the Pachat Yehuda. He was the Pasha, the governor over Yehuda in the times of Daryavish. Okay. Now, we don't know, by the way, of Zerubbabel. The Gemara says that Zerubbabel is called Zerubbabel, this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, because he was conceived, he was the Zera, he was conceived in Bavel. Interestingly, in Babylonian, there is a name Zar-Bab-El also, which could be a contraction of words. We don't know for sure, maybe a play on words, even his name. Yeshua was most likely Yehoshua ben Yehotzadak, who was the Kohen Gadol. We'll encounter him in the next parak. Nehemiah, we're not sure if this is the Nehemiah, who we'll encounter later. Probably not, or if it was another Nehemiah. Mordechai, now the Ibn Ezra says clearly this is Mordechai HaYehudi. The interesting thing is, why would Mordechai, after having been successful in the Purim story, it doesn't mean they all came together. This was over a period of time. Why would he leave Persia? And it might be that it was another person named Mordechai. Many of Chazal say it's the Mordechai. We don't know. Many of them, in fact, say that he was referred to as Mordechai Bilshan. Mordechai Bilshan, meaning Bal Lashon, the person who had the great abilities in language, and it's one name, Mordechai Bilshan. However, if you don't say it's Mordechai Bilshan, which is another possibility that there was somebody else named Bilshan, at that point, what you can say is, if you look, there are 11 names. 11 names, okay, interesting, is not as significant as when we look in the Nehemiah Perek Zayin, where there is one more name, Nachamani, who is inserted in here. Meaning that if I go from 11 to 12 names, I now understand you have 12 leaders of the Jewish people coming back from the Golah into Eretz Yisrael, analogous to the 12 tribes. Beria.
How could you even, excuse me, possibly think it's Mordecai from Esther when Ahasuerus was after Cyrus?
So what we have to say about this, and by the way, we do say this, that this list is not that these 12 all came at one time. There was a series of returns. The first one may have been by Sheshbatzar. If Sheshbatzar is not Zerubbabel, if he's his own person named Sheshbatzar, he brought back some. Then Zerubbabel brought some, and it's over a course of a period of time up until Ezra, who doesn't appear in our Sefer for another four or five prakim. It wasn't all at one shot. It doesn't say, by the way, it says here are the list of people who came back.
Well, I can't hold that in the same one.
Well, he would have had to go on Aliyah and come back to Persia.
Yeah, all of a sudden this decree comes out from a he
So-
realizes Esther is going to be in trouble. He comes back to take care.
Yeah, so it'll also depend, if you remember, on the chronology of those times. When all these things happen, there are, in other words, it's,
He wouldn't have had that-
Huh?
the internet, I don't think. You know,
no, the internet,
They had the internet in those days. didn't
no, the internet didn't happen until Al Gore. So we have some time for the internet. Okay, the reality is, we don't know. We don't know. And what's best part about it is, if it was Mordechai, as many in Chazal say, wonderful. If it wasn't Mordechai, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, it is entirely possible that people had the same names. Mordechai wasn't a Jewish name, it was a Persian name to begin with, and it may have been somebody else named Mordechai. It doesn't impact whatsoever the story. It doesn't impact any halachic aspect. So it could be, we don't know for sure. He doesn't pop up and play a role. He doesn't have a speaking part later on that will help us understand if he was or if he wasn't. And so we have this list. And what we do with the list is it's filed away. Okay, here's a list. Very nice. And maybe at some point in the future, that list will play even another role. At this point, that list is a list. And that's why actually I like the observation of the Dat Mikra when we look at the list from the Nehemiah. It says there's 12 names. That there actually were 12 names because there's certain symbolisms that are taking place. Remember, this is the first return from a galut since Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, you had 12 Nesiim. Here you have 12 people who are running this operation.
You don't have 12 Shvatim.
Don't have 12 Shvatim. By the way, the concept of 12 Shvatim is almost gone because from the 10 Shvatim that were, the 10 Shvatim that were exiled, Shimon is already assimilated within Yehuda. They pretty much lost their identity already. Binyamin and Yehuda are pretty close in their own identity. And we'll see what happens to some of those other 10 Shvatim also.
Doesn't really mean anything.
Well, but 12 still is symbolic. We will find that, and on a completely different note, and I know this isn't going to satisfy most of you, when we were designing the new building at Ida Crown, I had this one architect who started telling me we will have 12 columns symbolic of the 12 tribes, and we'll have this and this. He was giving me all these numbers. I said, just cut it out and build me a good building. Okay, don't give me symbolism. But to this very day, we talk about the number of windows a shul should have. The Gemara in Brachos says that a shul is supposed to have 12 windows, okay, for the 12 tribes. It's an interesting piece. If you look at Kins, we have 12 windows in the shul, okay? No, they're totally in order. You just have to, depending which way you read from. Yes?
How many did you say, King? You counted 11, I can't count.
Oh, so if Mordechai Bilshan is two different people.
So, do it with me, please.
Okay,
You know,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is up to Bilshan. Mispar is 8. Big Vai 9 is not a name. Yeah, right. Okay, Rechum and Bana. Those are the 11.
So they get to be people of importance.
Of course, there were people. Of course, there were people of importance. We don't know more than that. We know they were people of importance. They were leaders. We know that they didn't all come at once. We know that. Okay, this is recording, a culmination. Mispar Anshe Am Yisrael, and this is the number. Okay.
So you have Mispar and Mispar twice in the same.
The second Mispar is number, right? B'nai. Now we start with the list. Okay, and this list I'm going to go through relatively quickly, okay, because this list is a list of names with numbers, and you have that summary chart from Yoel Binun. B'nai Farash Alpayim Mea Shivim U'Shnayim. There's 2,072. 172. B'nai Shvatya 372. Then there's 372 from Shvatya. B'nai Arach 757. I'm just going to keep on going. B'nai Pachat. Okay, B'nai Pachat Moav Livnei Yeshua Yoav 2,812. And then we have 2,812. Interestingly, Pachat Moab is a very strange term, that he's the sons of the Pasha of Moab, of the governor of Moab. So that's it says that he was literally one of that family, this person, just like there was a person who was a governor over Yehuda, there's a governor over Transjordan, the area of Moab, and he was Jewish. Okay, Hartum suggests, that's Kasuto's brother-in-law, Hartum suggests that maybe at one point one of the family members had been the governor of Moab, and now they're coming back. B'nai Elam, okay, 1,254. The next group from Elam is 1,254. B'nai Zatu, 945. The family of Zatu is 945. B'nai Zakai, 760 from the family of Zakai. B'nai Vani, the family of Vani, that 242. B'nai Vevai, 623. Again, this is 623. By the way, anyone, the accountants in here would appreciate these lists. The rest of us are having a little bit of difficulty. B'nai Azgad. Okay, if you're looking for names of grandchildren, by the way, there's some nice names here that aren't used too often. The family of Azgad. 1,222.
That's the most biggest difference on that sheet.
Yep.
That's a huge difference.
Which one? Yeah.
The one that you're just saying. It's like 1,000.
Right. 100%. B'nai Adonikam, 100%. People of Adonikam, 666. Okay, 666. B'nai Bigvai, 2,056. Okay, from Bagvai is 2,056. B'nai Adin, the family of Adin, 454. Okay, 454. B'nai Ater L'Chizkiah. Okay, the family of Itar L'Chizkiah. Now, exactly what Itar L'Chizkiah, you have two different names here. The family of Itar, the family of Chizkiah. So the Tzudat David says, this might be the family of Itar who was offspring from Chizkiah, or it could be Itar and Chizkiah together. We're not really sure. Tish'im v'shmona. There's in that group 98. Bnei Vatzai Shloshmot Esrim v'Shlosha 323. Bnei Yorah Mea U'Shnei Masar. There's 112. Bnei Chashum Matayim Esrim v'Shlosha 223 from Chashum. Bnei Gibar Tish'im v'Chamisha 95 from Gibar. Interestingly, in Nehemiah they are referred to as Giv'on. Okay, and ultimately, we're really not talking about a problem of names. They're just two different names. But now, what we start doing we shift all of a sudden, and we start moving now from places from people to places. B'nei Beit Lechem. Okay, and these places are by and large places that are going to be, most of them are going to be in Binyamin. We talk about the people from Beit Lechem, Me'av Esrim U'Shlosha. Okay, there's 123. Anshe Netofa, Chamishim V'Shisha. Netofa is between Beit Lechem and Yerushalayim, and it's even a possibility that nowadays it may be as close, maybe close even to Yericho. Anshe Anatot, Mea Esrim U'Shmona. The people of Anatot were 128. Anatot is northeast of Yerushalayim. It's an Arab villages in Anatot today. Bnei Azmavet, Arba'im Ushnaim, the people of Azmavet, again, we're still northeast of Yerushalayim, and Kiryat Arim, Kfira Uveirot, Bnei Kiryat Arim, Kfira Uveirot, Sheva Ma'ot V'Arim U'Shlosha, the people of Kiryat Arim, which is Kiryat Ya'arim. Okay, for those of you who are traveling from the airport to Yerushalayim, you pass by Tel Stone. That's Kiryat Yarim. If you remember, there was a period of time the Aron was in Kiryat Yarim. And we also have Kfira and Ve'erot. It's on the northern side of Yehuda, right across the border into the tribe of Binyamin. Bnei Harama, the people of Harama. Harama, it's interesting. We're not really 100% sure, but it's close to Michmas. V'Gava, Sheshmot Esrim V'Achad, and also the people of Gava. Okay, which was at that point a little south of that area, was also 21. Anshe Michmas, we know where Michmas is nowadays. Okay, that's the city of Michmas. Mea Esrim U'Shnaim, 122. Anshe Beit El, we know where Beit El is. Ai, we know where Ai is. That's second city that Yoshua conquered. Matayim Esrim U'Shlosha, 223. Bnei Nevo, the people of Nevo. Nevo is most likely Nov, where the Kohanim had a city. If you remember, in the times of Shaul, he killed the Kohanei Nov. At that point, it's Nov is actually, the theory is it's Shuafat. I'm trying. What's the name of the Jewish neighborhood now that they built? Ramat Shlomo. Okay, which is an interesting question. But Nevo is probably Shuafat, which is an Arab village right across from Ramat Shlomo. Chamishim U'Shnayim. Bnei Magbish. The people of Magbish. Now, Magbish, we're not really sure where that is, but because of it's together with all the other cities in Binyamin, we assume it's Binyamin. Bnei Elam Acher 1254. People of Elam in this Elam Acher. This is also a different Elam because there was an Elam in the tribe of Judah. Bnei Charim 320. The people of Charim. Now, Charim, Ilana, if you're still there, Charim is Yerucham. Okay. Bnei Charim, 320. Bnei Lod, we know where Lod is. Okay, Chadid v'Ono, and we know where Chadid and Ono is about 6. It's right near. There's a Tel Chadid today, and Ono. It's about again near Lod as well. All of those cities. Shva me'ot esrim v'chamisha. Okay, 725. Bnei Yericho, that's Yericho. Okay, it's around Yericho, 345. 345. Bnei Sina'ah, 3,630. And then you have Snea, which is one of the names of the families, and possibly a place of a makom, of a place with name of a place within Binyamin. That's the people from Binyamin. Okay. Now Binyamin, if you remember, Yehuda, we have approximately 15,000 people. From Binyamin, we have approximately 4,000 people who are coming. And then we get Hakohanim. Okay, then we get Hakohanim. Now let's start talking about Kohanim. Okay, and the Kohanim and the Leviim, Hakohanim b'nei Ayam, Levet Yeshua, Shamaot Shivim U'Shlosha, 973. B'nei Imer, the family of Imer and the Kohanim, 1,052. B'nei Pashchur, the family of Pashchur, 1,247. B'nei Charim, 1,017. And the people of the family of Charim, 1,017. Those are the Kohanim. Now, interestingly, the Kohanim who come back, we learn in Masechet Tanit, the Kohanim who came back at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah were given a special privilege, that they were actually given rights. They had special holidays when they were providing the wood for the Mizbeach. And it was a recognition that they rose in stature because they were willing to take this risk and come back with the Galut. It's about 4,000, 10%, which is a pretty heavy percentage. If you think about it, of Kohanim to be coming back, Kohanim in general, 10% is even a large percentage nowadays. A lot of them came back. Haleviim, b'nei Yeshua v'Kadmiel, livnei Hodavaya, Shivim v'Arba'ah. The first group of Leviim, there were only 74 in that first group. Hamishorim b'nei Asaf, 128. There were 128 from the singers who were the offspring of Asaph, Mizmor la'Asaph. So from that family, B'nei HaShoarim, and the family who were in charge of the gates of opening and closing the doors of the Beit HaMikdash, B'nei Shalom, B'nei Ater, B'nei Talmon, B'nei Akuv, B'nei Chatita, B'nei Shovai, Hakol 139. All of them together were 139. So the great question comes up. You have Kohanim, you have 4,000 Kohanim, 4,500 Kohanim. You have 4,200 Kohanim. You have, however, Leviim only 340. It's a tremendous difference. Now, if you think about it, there should be more Leviim than Kohanim. Leviim was a whole tribe. Kohanim is from one family of Aaron. Why is there such a small number of Leviim? And it bothers everyone, all the Meforshim, why so few Leviim actually came back. So interestingly, if you go to the second side of that page that I gave you from Yoel Ben Nun, he wants to suggest in a footnote, he suggests an interesting answer. And I put it in red on that piece. I'm just going to read it. Rav Tzair, a young rabbi, originally I thought he was talking about Chaim Chernovitz, whose name was Rav Tzair, who lived in the early mid part of the 20th century. And I was trying to figure out how Yoel Ben Nun got together with the famous Rav Tzair, but it wasn't. A young rabbi, Shelamad Harbe Torah Ba'aretz. He learned a lot in Israel. But he went back for an educational role in the United States. He's barely pam. Madua rov haleviim lo aluim Zerubbabel. He gave his answer why you didn't have a lot of Leviim coming back with Zerubbabel. La kohanim b'mikdash haya kavod. The kohanim had a place of honor. V'aleviim hayu mishartim, and the Leviim were just working in the Beit HaMikdash. Bagola, but in the diaspora, hemayu rabbanim mechubadim v'roshei kilot. But the Leviim had these significant roles of honor in the diaspora. And that's why they wanted to stay in the Golos. It was a question of their personal status. That interestingly, they were more important when they were out there in the diaspora than they would come back to the Beit HaMikdash. By the way, I understand this fully. You ask most rabbis in America, why aren't you making aliyah? So the answer, the legitimate answer you're supposed to give is because I serve an important function. It's an important thing. The other part of the answer is because I couldn't get a job in Israel because they don't have rabbis. Okay, so I'm teaching in elementary school, I teach in high school. It's not the same kind of thing. Yeah, Leah.
And number 4 uses a phrase, mitel mela. What does that mean?
It's a place. We'll see in Pasuk Nun Tet. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Now, just to finish off this list, because we're really going, but I have to finish off about 40 psukim between now and the next 6 minutes. And I know this is gripping in this excitement of this. Natinim, the people who were from Givon, the Mitzudot David says the reason why they're called Natinim is because in Yoshua Perek Tet, Pasuk Chav Zayin, when this all comes down, Yoshua, it says, Vayitneim Yehoshua bayom hahu chotvei etzim v'shoavei mayim. Like that Yoshua placed them as the water carriers and the wood bearers, Vayitneim, the ones who were placed. Hanatinim b'nei Tzicha, b'nei Chashufa, b'nei Tabaot, b'nei Keros, b'nei Tziaya, b'nei Hafadon, b'nei Levana, b'nei Chagava, b'nei Akuv, b'nei Chagav, b'nei Shalmai, b'nei Chanan, b'nei Gidel, b'nei Gachar, b'nei Raya, b'nei Ratzim, b'nei Nekoda, b'nei Gazam, b'nei Uza, b'nei Faseach, b'nei Vesai, b'nei Asna, b'nei Meunim, b'nei Nifusim, B'nei Vakbuk, that's a great name to name your children. B'nei Chakufa, B'nei Charchor, B'nei Batzlut, B'nei Mechida, B'nei Charasha, B'nei Barkos, B'nei Sisra, B'nei Tamat, B'nei Netziach, B'nei Chatifa, B'nei Avdei B'nei Chatifa. Those were the Natinim, okay? Nice and simple, all of those families, and you didn't think we'd get that far. B'nei Avdei Shlomo. Now, the next group of people were the people who Shlomo HaMelech had taken from the indigenous areas, and he had made them into slaves, into servants, I guess, using Leah's word even better, that he did this. This goes back to Malachim Aleph, Perek Tet, Psukim Chav Techav Aleph, and he made them into servants because it was a labor tax he placed on them. And who are they? B'nei Sotai, B'nei Asoferet, B'nei Fruda, B'nei Allah, B'nei Darkon, B'nei Gidal, B'nei Shfatia, B'nei Chatil, B'nei Focheret HaTzvaim, B'nei Ami. And also these families. Kol HaNatinim, Uvnei Avdei Shlomo, 392. So altogether, there were 392. Ve'ela ha'olim, now these are the people, Mitel Melech Tel Charasha, Kruv Adan Imer. These are the places in Bavel they came from. But they couldn't say if they had any yichus. They didn't know who they were. Most likely there was intermarriage that took place. And as a result, unknown, the Malbim says these may have been abandoned children who we refer to halachically as a shtuki or a sufi. A sufi are people who are brought in from the marketplace. They just leave a baby there. You didn't know who the parents were. Shtuki, where it's already we know who the mother is, but we don't know who the father is. No one's saying anything. So these are people who didn't know. V'zaram imi Yisraelhim. Some of the Russian Jews, yeah, many of them know whether they're Jewish or not. Just a question. Yeah, there is intermarriage. Yeah,
refers to a Bavel name.
All these are Bavel names. B'nei Dlaya, B'nei Tovia, B'nei Nekoda, 652. So there were 652. We could get into a very interesting conversation now about whether or not the whole issue of the Soviet Aliyah, and we're not going to hit the end of it. I apologize about whether or not we should be taking them in on the Chok HaShvut. We seem to have a precedent to sometimes take them in. Uv'nei HaKohanim, B'nei Chavaya, B'nei HaKotz, B'nei Barzilai, Asher Lakach, Mibnot Barzilai Agiladi, Ishavi Yikra Shemam. These are another group of Kohanim. They looked for their lineage and they weren't able to find it. And they were Yigoalu, says Rashi, Migu Alim, they were defiled, or Migu Alim, with an ayin, they were purged, they weren't part of it. They weren't, unfortunately, they took wives who couldn't work, who couldn't be part of who couldn't marry into the Kunam. Vayomer had tirshata lahem, asher lo yachlu kodesh HaKodeshim. So unfortunately, the one who was in charge, this most Rashi says this is Nehemiah says this. Okay, he was called Hatarshata because he permitted people to do something they normally were not permitted to do. What was it? To drink non-Jewish wine, because they were in a place that they had to serve the king and they had to be wine tasters. So he gave them the permission to do so. Interestingly, the Dat Mikra says this is a Persian title of honor. It's an honorific Hatashata. Someone of significance within the Jewish people, the Chemia or someone else, told them, you don't know if you're Kohanim, you can't eat from Korbanos. Adamot Kohen Urim V'Tumim. Until along comes a coin with the Urim V'Tumim. That's like we say until Eliyahu comes or until Mashiach comes, because the Urim V'Tumim, the breastplate, was not in the second Beit HaMikdash, or the back of the breastplate was not in the Beit HaMikdash, that would cause the stones to light up. So they say, until such time, we can't tell you what to do. Altogether, there were 360. Okay. Milvad, Avadehem v'amotehem ele shivat alafim 337, beyond their servants, who were 7,337. V'lahem misharim misharod matayim, and another 200 singers. They came back. When they came back, it was a parade. People were singing along the way. They were entertaining. Suseim shvamot shloshim v'shisha. They had 736 horses. Pirdehem matayim arba'im v'chamisha. They had 245 mules. Gemaleim arba'mot shloshim v'chamisha. They had 435 camels. Chamorim, donkeys, sheshet alafim shvamot v'esrim. They had 6,000 donkeys, 6,720 donkeys. Now, the interesting thing out of all of this, if you look at these numbers, 42,000 people come back. We know 29,000 who they were. The Dat Mikra points out that with all of these people and all of these numbers, what's really interesting is they must have done a lot of walking, that the majority of the people actually walked from Babylonia. There weren't enough animals to transport them. Most of these donkeys, for example, they were the ones that were transporting their goods. And so people literally walked back. And the leaders of the people went ahead and they gave their contributions to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. They worked really hard to give us. Zahav dar kimonim, they gave drachmas. Shesh ribaot ve'elef, okay, they gave 60,000 and 1,000, 61,000. V'kesef manim, chamesh dalafim, and they gave a manna, which was 5,000 of them. V'ketanot kohanim mea, and they gave also clothing for the kohanim. V'yeshvu kohanim v'alevim u'minam u'misharim v'ashorim v'netinim b'arehem v'chol Yisrael b'arehem. And now they all come back to the Beit HaMikdash. So the question is, what happened? Where are those other 11,000 people? So if you look in Yoel Ben Nun, and I'm going to end with this, and I know I'm a minute late, and I apologize, and I did run a little bit. He says on the second side of the page, how do we explain the difference between the 12,000 or the 11,000, depending on what text you're using, and what we actually have? And for those who are out, I'm just going to read it. One suggestion is that these are the people, when we get to the 42,000, that's because we're counting the people who were in Yehuda already, who never have been exiled. Or maybe there were 12,000 people who went with the first wave with Shesh Batzar that are not counted in the Zerubbabel and post-Zerubbabel list. Yachadim Klei HaMikdash, together with all the utensils. Livnei Aliyat Zerubbabel, before Zerubbabel came up, Klomar, Kol Kahal Kachad, Kilel, Gamet Eile Shekvar Yu B'Yuda Livnei Mifkad Olim Zerubbabel, meaning that if I want to know where these 12,000 people came from, it's an all-inclusive number of people who came before, people who may have been there, we don't know. But the Yoel Ben Nun says this is difficult. With all the precise numbers, including the utensils, including the people who come up, how could you go ahead and left out the 12,000 number that would have come with Shesh Batzar? Oh, or that there were 12,000 people still living there? The answer, the second answer, causes a lot of queries. That this 12,000 were people who didn't come from Yehuda. Now, I gave you the page from the Seder Olam Rabbah that says what Chazal say. And he says, Arba Ribo Bichlal Ufrat Enan El Lamed Elef. He says there were 40,000, and we only see 30,000. V'Gimel Mot V'Shishim V'Yudbet Elef Heichenheim. Where were they? Ela Elu Sha'alu Mishar Hashvatim. Says Seder Olam Rabbah. The other Shvatim, the non-Yehuda and Binyamin Shvatim, the people who had been exiled earlier by the Assyrians came back. Kevan Shatzarat Koresh, and now we're in the bold print. Since the decree of Koresh, says Yoel ben Nun that since the permission from Koresh to go back on Aliyah was only talking about Yerushalayim, which was in Yerushalayim, which was in Yehuda, it was forbidden at that time to mention the northern tribe people who'd been there a long time. Many of the returnees were from the north. And they went back to the lands of Ephraim, Menashe, and also up to the Galil. You couldn't mention these settlers. But after the time of the Asmoneans, they became powerful. They found all of the compatriots all over the north. In other words, what Yoel ben Nun is saying, and with this will end, what happened to those people? Where were they? The answer is they were from the other Shvatim. And because they were from the other Shvatim, they really didn't get permission to go back. It was against Cyrus's decree. Cyrus's decree was just for Yerushalayim and Yehuda to go back. So 12,000 people went back. They were anonymous people because we couldn't mention them. It was somewhat against the law. They were settlers going onto hilltops. Makes all the sense in the world. By the way, this terminology of Yoel ben Nun. Yoel ben Nun was one of the early people from the Gush Amunim. Also, he uses this terminology because it's terminology that's who he is as well. But they did go up, and that's where those missing people are. We're going to stop right here.
What about Ezra and Nehemiah? Where did they fit?
They're going to come later. They're coming later. Nehemiah,
They're not part of this group.
they're not part of this group. We'll see how it plays out. Okay. Before